Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Welcome to lecture number 23 of this series. As we are gradually moving towards the end, I'm sure you guys are you'd be really looking forward to it. It's that time of the semester, it's that time of the coursework that one tends to feel that now we should get over with this thing and just go ahead with it because it gets boring. At least that is the feeling in the semester. At least that is what we felt as students ourselves. At times it can get boring, at times it can get jarring, but let me tell you, there is some interesting stuff coming your way. So don't get bored, stay tuned. There is a lot more stuff, there is a lot more graphical analysis, there is a lot more in practical examples that you'd see, which shall make the course interesting. So don't go away, don't get bored. We have a lot more over here. So let's move ahead with this lecture and do the ritual of first of all going through what we studied in the previous lecture. But how about a podcast now? How about article? Would you like to have it before the previous lecture, or would you like to have it before after that? No, not up for it. Not surprised. You don't have the appetite, do you? No, I suppose it's not listening to podcasts and reading the articles. It's not one of the most engaging activities. But what they say is that it's a necessary evil. I thought that it's a necessary evil. I certainly think it is, because you have to listen to that sort of stuff just to get an idea how public policy is implemented in the world, if it's a podcast. And you have to read to take in examples, to take in these lessons of how good policies are implemented. Remember, in one of the previous lectures, we've gone through a lot of them, but in one of the latest one was, I think, on the Irish government's decision to impose taxes on the plastic bags, and the kind of very good positive impact that it had on cleanliness, pollution, and the change in culture, change in behaviors. So don't worry, we don't have a podcast and any article to read in this one and this lecture. No, we don't. So I'm sure it would be a relief for you, but anyway, we have a lot more of the stuff to do over here, including the graphical analysis. I'm sure you'd be up for the graphical analysis. It looks interesting, it can be challenging. For those of you especially who haven't had these kind of courses like economics, basic economics before. So let's go ahead, let's see what we covered in the previous lecture before going towards other interesting topics. Risk analysis and various types of steps involved in its construction. We went through another methodology known as risk analysis. This is not very often employed in public policy discourse or public policy analysis. The dominant ones are cost benefit analysis, calculating internal rate of returns, net present values, and these sort of things. Risk analysis in itself, it's a large field. It's a very competitive field, and as I mentioned I believe I mentioned in my previous lecture that if you could do a master in risk analysis, it's pretty mathematical and quantitative stuff, statistical stuff, then there is a high demand for these professionals, because not everybody can go ahead with those kind of complex mathematical models. Not everybody can do that kind of computation, but they are highly paid, they are high in demand, especially in the private sector. So it's a good field, but for public policy analysis, its use is not that frequent as the use of cost benefit analysis and other things like that. So we went through the basics of risk analysis and various type of steps involved in its construction, how we construct this risk analysis index or kind of a performer. And I gave you an example of how to conduct a risk assessment analysis that was related to a factory, government establishment. I proposed a performer. I showed you a performer that these can be the steps in it, And of course I said that you can add yours. I left a few spaces, blank spaces over there. I filled a few, then left it for you, for your imagination, for your exercise to do it. But even the design of the performer, that can be different from your perspective. Depends upon where you are carrying out the risk, what kind of risk are you carrying out. In the last we discussed the graphical illustration of consumer and producer surplus in lieu of government's tax on imports. The graphical analysis was incomplete. We are going to complete it over here now. But I talked about trade, I talked about consumer and producer surplus, and I talked about imports, quotas and tariffs. Remember I said that tariffs and quotas are basically forms of taxes that government imposes in terms of imports in order to restrict them. The main motive behind imposing tariffs and quota is restricting imports. The difference between tariff and quota being that in quota only a certain amount of units are involved for import, for the purpose of import. As far as tariffs are concerned, you can import as many as the units as you want, as the importer wants. There is no restriction upon the units imported, but you have to pay, the importer has to pay a certain tax that the government imposes. Now what does that do to the producer surplus and consumer surplus? We will look at the graphical illustration, and that also is let me tell you pretty much what happens in the real world too. If you can gauge what kind of effects it would have, then even a graph can be very, very helpful in predicting what will happen. Besides that, I discussed a bit of trade. We will be discussing it even more in the coming lectures. What I discussed was that overall there is unanimity of views when it comes to trade, at least among economists, that trade overall, especially free trade, is very beneficial to the health of a nation. I gave you the example of NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement between Mexico, United States and Canada, and how it, after its implementation, a study was carried out in just recently, 20 or 30 years after its implementation, and it found that there were substantial benefits to all the countries in this this kind of free trade agreement. Remember, this is a free trade agreement. The free flow of services and goods across borders without any tariff or without any quota. Any of you who is interested in it, it's a good reading, who would be doing public policy analysis and would be in this field, you definitely would benefit from studying that that paper. I'll try to put it up, but even if I don't put it up, you can always study on NAFTA, research on NAFTA, and you'd find that paper written by 2 economists. It's a very good one. Then there are certain things that we need to talk about in taxes. For the moment we are going through the graphical analysis. We are not going through anything else, but in the coming lectures, since this is a very important topic, and I believe I mentioned how important it is in terms of I cited China and India's example and how they benefited from trade and where they are now and where they were 20 years ago. So it's a very important topic. In the coming lectures I'm going to go through the basics of trade. You need to know those, because when you are discussing public policy related to trade, suppose trade with Iran, trade with India, trade with Afghanistan, you need to know that stuff besides this graphical analysis. For example, you need to know the concept of comparative advantage, absolute advantage, and its application and how it developed. Then there are some other theories of trade too that I'll probably share with you. So not in a lot of detail, that it can be done if you take a course of economics. For those of you who haven't taken the course of economics till now, that would be very beneficial. But for the moment we'll just stick with this graphical analysis, and in the coming lectures we'll be discussing trade and related issues in detail. So let's move ahead with this tariff and quota graphical analysis continued. The graphs, let me just start with where I left previously. In fact, I'll start over again. Let us just go from the scratch. Let us just start from the scratch. So what I did over there in the last lecture was that I drew a y-axis, then I drew an x-axis just like this. By now you would be very familiar with all this stuff. This x-axis and y-axis, this is the price P, this is the quantity Q, then you have this demand curve over here sliding down. And the last time I made it, I asked you to do a mental calculation, recall why our demand curve is downward sloping. You should hopefully have recalled why the demand curve is downward sloping and the supply curve that is upward sloping. Recall again why it is upward sloping. This is the equilibrium point. This is the price P naught, which is before trade, and over here you have this areas, you have this area A, you have this area B. This whole area over here, this triangle over here, that represents consumer surplus. This is what I'm talking before trade. This area over here, that is producer surplus, and let me write a O over here, which means origin. So let's write it down. This is the case of a tariff being imposed. We are analyzing the imposition of a tariff. I believe it's 1 R and 2 Fs, but anyway, in this case let's just go with the analysis without considering anything else. Before trade, suppose there is no trade and we have this item, any specific item whose price is P naught, price P naught. This is the equilibrium point E. Consumer surplus, then the producer surplus. It's A, this one is B, total surplus before trade. I'm just writing surplus, abbreviating surplus to serve, is A plus B. That is your total surplus. This area, start from here, come down here. This whole area is the total surplus, which is divided between the consumer and the producer. Now consider, it can go both ways, but what we are doing, I believe in the last lecture that I conducted and we were carrying out this analysis, I gave you the example of I presupposed, in fact, that this is a good that is not sufficient to meet the requirements, the demands of the people, and it is comparatively high. So, and gave you the example of natural gas, which is nowadays its supply is restricted, or its supply is dwindling, it's going down. It cannot meet the demands of the whole nation. So let us suppose there is a free trade agreement with Iran. Iran has one of the biggest reserves of gas and oil in the world. So it has lots of gas, and there is a free trade agreement about this, the free flow of goods and services from borders, and suddenly there is all this gas arriving from Iran. What do you expect to happen to the price? Well, when the quantity increases, quantity of a good demanded increases, its production increases, what happens is the price comes down. So in terms of free trade, let us suppose that the price comes down over here, sorry, it comes down to P1. look where it meets the supply curve, look where it meets the demand curve. Let us just name these as Q1. What happened after free trade was negotiated between two countries and supposedly the gas started flowing was that the price came down to P1. And you can see over here there is a new area created over here. Let us name this as area C. So what's different now after trade, after free trade in fact? I'm sorry, I'm going to have this problem with this thing in the whole course because I'm not just used to it. That is why I'm just repeating everything so that it's easy for you to understand. Anyway, this is after free trade. The price now is okay. Where did the pen go? P1. Consumer surplus. What will be the consumer surplus now? Price has come down. Try to guess now. What is the consumer surplus now? What area is covered? What area is covered by this price decrease from P0 to P1? Where would this area go? That would go to the consumer because a reduction in price increases his surplus, his satisfaction. So it would be A plus B. Producer surplus. What would happen to producer surplus? This area. So you can see that in terms of free trade and in terms of this specific good, remember we are just talking about one good. We are not talking about the whole economy. We are just talking about one good that is that was in short supply, but when free trade agreement was reached hypothetically between two countries, suppose Pakistan and Iran, and this gas started flowing freely because Iran has lots of reserves of it. What happened to the price was, now that it's in ample quantity and is available, in fact there is a surplus of it, so the price would come down. When prices come down, who benefits? Consumer. And who suffers? The domestic producer, because he was getting this price P0, which is higher than P1, but now he'd be selling at P1 because there is no more competition, more supply. So his area of surplus is reduced to C, and the area that he loses, it goes to the consumer, who is now consuming more. So over here, what's the total surplus now? A plus B plus C. This is now the total surplus. That's the same area, but now that it has been now been bifurcated into three parts that represents the total surplus. Now suppose under the pressure of a lobby or under the pressure of the industrialist, the producer, who is now selling at this price and is only left with this area as a surplus. Or maybe the government comes up with this notion that we need to protect our industries. That this happens a lot in practice too. They try to protect the industries through tariffs and quotas. That is another main reason that tariffs and quotas are imposed on imports. So the government, suppose the government, either under pressure from these producers or in its good judgment, I wouldn't say good judgment, in its judgment thinks that we need to protect the producers, the domestic producers, it imposes a tariff on the import of gas from Iran. Instead, so there is now there is no free trade over here because now the government has imposed a tariff, and what tariffs do is that impedes the free flow. Now the people will have to pay a tax. What does the tariff do to imports in this case? Well, definitely it will take the price higher. Let's say that it comes over here, it comes to P2 in this case, and there are these areas created in between. Suppose now this is A, B, C. Let's name this area as D, F, this area is G, this area is H, this area is I. So now we have this situation where after a tariff is imposed, what happens now is that the price now price goes up to P2. What happens to the consumer surplus? What happens to the consumer surplus? Now remember that at P1 all of this area from over here till here and up from over there till there, that was in consumer surplus. So what has consumer lost? Consumer has lost this area D. So now its total surplus again comes down to A plus B. Producer surplus now comes down to C plus D. Now remember, the producer has now gained this area, this whole area, with the imposition of tariff, because the price of that good gas has gone up. So the producer has regained some of that area, recaptured some of that area, lost surplus area due to this government policy. What would be the total surplus over here? That would be A plus B plus C. A, B, C, D, that is the total surplus that is being captured in this area. Then what are these areas that have developed after the imposition of taxes? This area, just bring it down over here to Q2 and to Q2. This is where the production is taking place now, and you could see that if this was the equilibrium production before the taxes were imposed, before free trade agreement and before this imposition of a tariff. But what happens with the tariff is that quantity supplied, remember this is the supply curve, and these lines are intersecting the supply curve. Supply increased, but what happened with the tariff when price went up? Not surprisingly, the quantity demanded went down over here. Now over here, what you're going to see is that by imposing a tax, government is also collecting a revenue. So the government revenue over here would be this portion I. And what is this G and H? Now I remember one of the things that we studied previously, deadweight loss. The deadweight loss is area G plus H. Now why is it a deadweight loss? Remember, the deadweight loss for policy was the inefficiency. It was due to the inefficiency of a policy. Now deadweight loss over here, it's called a deadweight loss because neither is it going to the consumer, neither is it going to the producer, and even the government isn't capturing this deadweight loss. That is a loss in efficiency because nobody captures it, and it is graphically, it is shown by this area. So there is this deadweight loss in terms of impeding free flow of trade in this particular case of imposition of a tariff. And this is pretty much how you show the surplus, how it declines, the surplus of a consumer declines or a producer declines, then the government steps in and takes part of those proposed what could be become a consumer or producer surplus. It takes away from that, and that I portion, that is government revenue, and with that government imposition of that tariff, there is some deadweight loss to the society, to the producers and consumers, and that is shown by the area G plus H. So this was a graphical illustration of what happens when a tariff is imposed. In fact, one thing that I haven't mentioned over here, yes, there was one thing missing over here. Stay with me, don't get bored, don't worry, this is a simple thing. You have to identify this area of total loss in consumer or producer surplus, or you can just say total loss in surplus. Remember, there was surplus either captured by the consumer or the producer. Now that surplus is lost, and that is given by G plus I plus H. देखिए, अब हमने बात की इसमें कि एक जो इंपोर्ट्स आ रही होती है फ्री ट्रेड में, अब इस पर्टिकुलर केस में ये याद रखिएगा कि ये इतने कोई सिंपलिस्टिक एनालिसिस नहीं होते जैसा कि मैंने कहा है, लेकिन ये मैंने ग्राफ्स जो होते हैं काफ़ी हेल्पफुल होते हैं आपको बताने के लिए कि होगा क्या, प्रोबेबल होगा क्या, एंड जो बनाए गए हैं वो भी कुछ सोच समझ के बनाए गए हैं। इस तरह के ग्राफ्स किसी ने स्टडी किए हैं, उसके बाद ही ये ग्राफ्स बनाए हैं। ग्राफ हमें क्या बता रहा है? ग्राफ हमें ये बता रहा है कि जो फ्री ट्रेड इस ये जो गुड है, ये जो एक प्रोडक्ट है, हम नेचुरल गैस की बात कर रहे हैं, कि जब हम मुआहिदा करते हैं, सपोज फॉर द सेक ऑफ आर्ग्यूमेंट कि हम ये मुआहिदा करते हैं ईरान से कि गैस की सप्लाई जो है वो फ्री होगी, फ्री ट्रेड एग्रीमेंट के तहत होगी, यानी उसमें कोई टैक्स वगैरह नहीं लग रहा, डिमांड के मुताबिक है, यहाँ पे अगर डिमांड है तो ईरान से गैस आती रहेगी। उसके बाद ये होता है कि जब गैस की सप्लाई बढ़ जाती है, कीमत नीचे आ जाती है, कंज्यूमर का सरप्लस इसलिए बढ़ जाता है कि कीमत कम है, प्रोड्यूसर का सरप्लस इसलिए कम हो जाता है कि वो कम कीमत पे प्रोड्यूस कर रहा है, वो चीज़ सप्लाई कर रहा है। फिर किसी भी वजह से, वजह दो हो सकती है, वजह ये हो सकती है कि प्रोड्यूसर्स की लॉबी जो है काफ़ी स्ट्रांग है और वो गवर्नमेंट को ये कहती है कि हमारा नुकसान बहुत हो रहा है, तो अब इस चीज़ को कम किया जाए या बंद किया जाए। और या फिर दूसरी वजह ये हो सकती है कि हुकूमत खुद ये कहे, इनके पॉलिसी मेकर्स हुकूमत में जो बैठे हुए हैं वो ये कहें कि नहीं, इस तरह तो हमारे यहाँ पे जो डोमेस्टिक प्रोड्यूसर्स हैं, जो यहाँ पे काम करने वाले हैं, कारखानेदार, सनतकार वगैरह हैं, उनको नुकसान पहुँच रहा है इस कम कीमत की वजह से, तो इसको कोई करेक्टिव मेजर लिया जाए। तो फिर ये हो सकता है कि टैरिफ इम्पोज किया जा सकता है। टैरिफ की वजह से, उसकी इम्पोजिशन की वजह से कीमत जो है वो P1 से P2 तक बढ़ जाती है, और P1 से P2 तक बढ़ने की वजह से उसमें फिर अगर वो चेंजेस आती है कंज्यूमर प्रोड्यूसर सरप्लस में, लेकिन उसके साथ साथ एक नई चीज़ आती है कि जो और मज़ीद उसमें एरियाज़ हैं, वो डेडवेट लॉस का एक एरिया आता है, वो लॉस इन एफिशिएंसी के ट्रेड जो है उसने सफ़र किया है, उसकी एफिशिएंसी जो फ्री ट्रेड से थी कि जितने आराम से, जितनी सहूलत से वो काम हो रहा था, उसमें वो उस सहूलत से नहीं हो रहा। इस चीज़ को कैसे कैप्चर किया जाता है? इस चीज़ को कैप्चर किया जी, एरिया जी और एच ने। और जाहिर है जब टैरिफ लगेगा, हुकूमत टैक्स लगाएगी, तो वो टैक्स उसको आमदन के तौर पे वसूल होगा। तो ये एरिया आई था। अब देखें इसमें ना ये कंज्यूमर के पास जा रहा है सरप्लस, ना प्रोड्यूसर के पास जा रहा है। ये किसके पास जा रहा है? ये जा रहा है इसका एक हिस्सा जा रहा है हुकूमत के पास, और कुछ हिस्से जो इसमें है वो ना हुकूमत के पास जा रहे हैं ना दोनों के पास। वो डेड वेट लॉस है ऑफ एफिशिएंसी। और टोटल्स जो कमी बेशी हुई है, मतलब लॉस इन सरप्लस है, कमी हुई है सरप्लस में, जो कि या कंज्यूमर के पास जा सकता था या प्रोड्यूसर के पास। वो ये 3 एरियाज रह गए G+I+H, जिसकी वजह से कंज्यूमर और प्रोड्यूसर को नुकसान पहुंच रहा है। सो दिस इज प्रीटी मच हाउ वी डू दिस टैरिफ स्टफ, and hopefully it wasn't that difficult for you. You've captured all the details. I gave you all this graphs. I gave you all the details about those triangles that will form and which one would be which and which one would be which. In fact, I've written all the mentioned them against numerals A, B, C, D. So it shouldn't be difficult for you to capture. So keep this in mind. You need to draw this again by yourself. Now that we are done with the tariff, let's move on towards the case of quota and what would be different this time around. What would be different this time around? In the case of quota, what has happened is, let me just first wrap this. Okay, we've got a clean slate again, and I'm sure you'd be all looking forward to drawing again this graphs, this graph and doing this graphic analysis. It's interesting. Sometimes it can be challenging, but at least for those who have begun it, those who have been studying it beforehand, it could be interesting. For those who have been this is for those for whom this is the first time, I should say, this could be a bit challenging, but don't worry. This just you need to understand what I said. I'm not going to ask you anything else. If I ask you on the quizzes or exams, this is what I'm going to ask you pretty much, and it's going to be easy. So if you have understood this thing, you don't need to worry about it. Now this case, this one is about quota. Now remember, quota is just like tariff. The nature of these two things is the same. They are basically aimed at reducing imports or trying to disincentivize them. But quota is different because in tariffs you just take a tax and don't limit the units imported. But in quota, what the government does is it limits the units imported. It doesn't, and that is one way of doing it. That is one way of reducing the imports or impeding the trade. How does it impede it? Let's go ahead with the analysis and see how it is done. It is pretty much in the same vein as we did before, as we did in the case of a tariff. Anyway, here you go. You have the price over here, you have the quantity over here. Mind you, this time around I'm not going to write everything down. This analysis is almost the same as we did in the tariff. There is only one simple change that I am going to mention in it, and then write down what would be different from what we did in the case of tariff. Otherwise the details are the same. There isn't much difference in it. But anyway, I'm going to draw it again. This is the demand curve, this is the supply curve. You have this price over here, P naught in the absence of trade. This is area A, which is the consumer surplus. This is area B, which is the producer surplus. Suppose the price comes down over here. After trade, free trade, price comes down to P1, extend this over here and over here to this horizontal axis. Let's call this Q1, let's call this Q1, both of these Q1. Now after this, as we studied in just studied, that once this price comes down to P1, the only thing that happens is that the producer surplus area, it is reduced significantly. Let's name this as C. Now this area, whole area over here, starting from here, this whole area is now captured by the consumer because of the decline in prices, the reduction in prices. This area remaining over here, C, that is the producer surplus. So you can see that with free trade, with the coming in of that quantity which was restricted in before, now that there is free flow of it and there is abundance of it, we expect the price to come down, and in fact it comes down. And this is what the kind of changes that would take place is in the consumer and producer surplus. The government hasn't stepped in right now. Now over here, this is the imposition of a quota, and price comes up to P2, again extended is over here and over here. This is Q2, this is Q2. These are the areas that are formed previously, and we said that just name these areas as, this is D, this is E, this is area F, this is area G. So when you are doing this analysis over here, what would happen to this, what would be the change in total surplus and how it changes, what would be the deadweight loss areas, that would remain the same. The only difference in terms of quota, in terms of graphical analysis, that you are going to see over here, different than a tariff, is that we will draw a supply curve over here passing through this point. This is the new supply curve. It is called S dash. Now there might arise a question in your mind why it has transferred to the shifted to the right side of supply curve. A shift to the right side of the supply curve means that the supply has increased. Now you might be thinking that why is that? Because a quota is specifically, if quota was implemented and if quota did take place, it was implemented, then why did supply increase? Supply should decrease. Supply does decrease, but we have shown an increase in supply for the simple reason that we are considering what would it have been without free trade. Without free trade, you would have been over here with this supply. That is only the domestic supply. With free trade, supply is probably somewhere over here. No, this is not the right one. Just ignore this line. The supply would somewhere be over here with free trade. Now with the imposition of a quota, supply goes to this S dash. Just ignore this line. I am just making it for your understanding. You can ignore this line, and this one was just an aberration. The pen just moved someplace. Anyway, this is the new supply curve. This is what you need to consider, and this would have been impossible if there was no trade. So there has been an improvement in trade, there has been an improvement in supply, but unfortunately government has imposed a quota which has reduced the supply, but reduction does not mean that it has come over to this place. No. If there were no trade taking place, then this, or if the quota had succeeded in eliminating the trade, the free trade, then the supply curve would have shifted from over here to over here. But that didn't happen. The quota took the price up to P1, not up to P0. Now this one over here is your new supply curve, which means that although limited, but there is, the supply has increased with trade, and this is the new supply curve, the S dash. The only difference over here is that there is this area that has developed. This is a new area that has developed, that will also become the deadweight loss. Suppose let us just name it as Z. This area develops due to this drawing of the supply curve, and the supply curve is there because of quota. It was not there in the case of tariff. So only difference that it has made over here is that it has increased the deadweight loss over here of this quota. So this new area that has developed over here due to this supply curve S dash, this is the Z area over here. Now if you remember, in the case of tariff, this whole area, this F area up till here, that went to the government as revenue. Now what has changed over here? The only thing that has changed over here is that this area total, let me just write it down, area F plus Z or Z, does not go to government as revenue. Why? This is the reason. In terms when there is the application of a quota and government applies a quota, then it grants licenses to import license. That import license comes with a quota, attached with the quota. Now import, when there is an import license, then once that import license is granted to those who have that there's private interests that have that license, then the government removes itself from this process, import export process for the moment, at least as in terms of importing. It has given the license, of course, for a price. There is obviously revenue for the government, but we are talking about this stuff only when trade happens. In this case, it's not trade happening when government grants a license and collects money from those for those licenses. This is not trade, this is just an exchange of wealth, because private importers who have got this license believe that there is ability to there is this prospect of making some money out of it by buying this import license, and they give money, they buy it from the government, but import is not taking place. They are not buying it based upon that imported unit. Imported unit hasn't entered the equation yet, but once the government grants the license, import license, the importer, he uses that license to lay claim on those imports that have been narrowed down in quantity due to the imposition of quota. So who is capturing this import surplus once it is imported? It is the one who is holding the license, the import license. It is not the consumer, it is not the producer, it is the person who is who has this import license, who would be capturing this area F plus Z. So that is the only thing that is different about a quota from a tariff. Hopefully this was also not difficult for you to understand, not the tidiest of diagrams, but as I said, don't look at the tidiness and untidiness of the diagram. What is important is that you understand this stuff. Hopefully I was clear again on this matter and what to do with it. Just to again briefly go through this stuff, we in the case of quota, the only thing that would be different is that you would draw a supply curve over here. That is the new supply curve now, and the rationale for drawing a supply curve over here and showing it as an increase in supply is that this is the position that would be when import is taking place despite restrictions. If there were no imports, then obviously the supply curve would have been here. But there are imports despite restrictions, and this shows that the supply would increase. So this is the supply curve that shifts rightward, and I've drawn it. But the only thing that it does differently in terms of the case of tariff is that it introduces a new area over here, this area Z, in this F area, and this F plus Z area, this total area, this is captured by the import license holder, not the government. Government has just granted an import license to a person or a group, and that import license is used by that person to gain that surplus. It is not going to the consumer, it is not going to the producer. This whole area is going to the person who has the import license. Of course, G and E, that would still remain as the deadweight loss areas, the loss in efficiency of imposing a certain restriction on imports, that would still remain, but that I've already written down in case of tariff. Everything is the same. The only thing that is different is that this new area F plus Z, that goes to the import licenses. So hopefully this was interesting for you, intuitive for you, and you would be using it a lot when you are doing it in terms of analyzing trade agreements. We'll be studying further about trade. You need other tools too. You need to know about the absolute and comparative advantage and a few more theories which we'll go through briefly. I'll definitely give you a few examples of how to calculate an comparative advantage. That is the basis of trading. That is what usually is done when comparing the benefits and the costs of trading with one another. So hopefully this was a good lesson for you. Let's move on towards the other things. Draw it by yourself. That would give you practice. So the next very interesting topic that we've discussed in very brief till now, the game theory. Game theory, remember we said the only thing that we discussed about game theory, and I drew a matrix over there, small matrix, and try to state or try to demonstrate what it is about. Game theory is about strategy. Game theory is about actions in lieu of the other people, competitors or colleagues, and what they would do. And then suppose you and I, we are in a game. So my reactions in terms of game theory, my reactions over a certain issue would depend upon what your action is, and similarly your action would probably depend upon what kind of action I take. So we as actors of game theory are both of us are trying to guess the motives of one another. It's not necessary that I will take the first step. It's not necessary that you will take the first step and go ahead with that action. But this is, as you can imagine, this is kind of a guessing game over here, and it gives rise to strategies. It gives rise to outcomes, and this is the simple illustration of this game theory is the one that was given by its founders and later developed more, was called the prisoner's dilemma. So what exactly is the prisoner's dilemma? Suppose there are two prisoners over here. Let me draw the matrix. Suppose you have prisoner A, on the other hand you have prisoner B. Draw a matrix over here, not the matrix movie, but just a matrix, a rectangular area. Hopefully that's okay for you. Now these prisoners over here, they are confronted with two broad choices. One is to, let me just draw this thing. The first one is to confess of the crime that they have been caught with. That was the reason that they were caught, and they are the prisoners. That's why we are assuming that there was a crime. Confess. And the second strategy, or the second general one, is not to confess. Now why we are placing prisoner A and prisoner B, what is their relations? Again, remember that in many cases, in many instances in real life, your strategy, your action in a certain field would depend upon the action of the other. So over here in this case, the outcome or the fate of prisoner A and prisoner B is tied with one another, and they over here are trying to guess the motives of one another, trying to guess what would prisoner A is trying to guess what prisoner B would do, and what then he should do in terms of his response, in lieu of his what action that he takes. What would the response of prisoner A be? Similarly, look at it from prisoner B's perspective, and he's trying to guess what would prisoner A do. Would he confess? Would he not confess? And in lieu of what he does, what action that he takes, what should I do? What should my strategy would be? So over here, similarly for prisoner B, the strategy, the general strategy is the same: confess and not confess. Now there are many outcomes over here. Let's draw the outcomes. This one is for prisoner A, this one is for prisoner B. Similarly over here. These are the probable outcomes for both the prisoners in terms of what they do, what action that they take. Suppose it's something like this. So let's write it down. Let's make it 3 years over here. Let's make it 1 year over here and 1 year over here. You have the 3 years over here, or the 3 months over here, suppose. Five years, and what should this one be? Let me just think. Perhaps this one should be the same as this one. Alright, now we have this matrix filled up. We have these probable strategies over here, and let's see what the outcome of the games would be. Now there are certain results, outcomes which are known as equilibriums over here. So let us just go through what kind of equilibriums would we arrive at, and what do they imply in terms of game theory. So let's first see what happens if from the prisoner B's point of view. How would prisoner B go about thinking about this stuff, trying to imagine? As I said, it's a lot of it is guessing game, and we are thinking in terms that they don't know, or they are not informed of each other's intentions. There is no information flow between them, and that happens in the real world. When you are in a guessing game with somebody, when you are strategizing against somebody, you don't have that perfect information about what the other person's intention are. So suppose from a prisoner B's point of view, how would he reason as far as this is concerned? So it's prisoner B. He is guessing like this. He is reasoning like this. If A confesses, then what should I do? This implies नाउ देखें यहाँ पे अब वो कह रहा है कि अगर ए कन्फेस करता है, प्रिजनर ए, अगर ए कन्फेस करता है तो आप कन्फेशन के सामने की मैट्रिक्स देखें, ए की कन्फेशन के लिए मैट्रिक्स है 3 साल की। अगर वो कन्फेस करता है, बी कहता है कि प्रोबेबली आई शुड कन्फेस टू, वजह क्या है? अगर ए कन्फेस कर लेता है और प्रिजनर बी जो है वो कन्फेस नहीं करता, तो देखें प्रिजनर ए की कितनी रह जाती है कैद, उसकी 3 महीने की कैद रह जाती है, जबकि प्रिजनर बी की कैद कितनी रह जाती है, 5 साल की कैद रह जाती है। इसलिए अगर प्रिजनर ए कन्फेस करता है तो प्रिजनर बी के लिए भी बेहतर स्ट्रेटेजी यही होगी कि वो बी कन्फेस करे, दोनों को 3-3 साल मिलेंगे। नाउ इसमें यह हो सकता है कि इफ ए डज नॉट कन्फेस, फिर क्या होना चाहिए बी के लिहाज से, बी के मद्देनजर से फिर क्या होना चाहिए? अगर प्रिजनर ए जो है वो कन्फेस नहीं करता तो देखें उसको तो 5 साल सजा होनी ही होनी है। उस वक्त जो प्रिजनर ए बी है उसके लिए फिर क्या करना चाहिए? उसको फिर भी उस हालत में भी कन्फेस इसलिए कर देना चाहिए क्योंकि उसकी सजा सिर्फ 3 महीने रह जाएगी। बी शुड स्टिल कन्फेस। इन दोनों केसेस में आपने देखा जो ए की स्ट्रेटजी है, जो कि बी उसको इमेजिन कर रहा है, वो उसको कोशिश कर रहा है कि यार ये स्ट्रेटजी होगी बी की। अब इन दोनों के दरमियान कोई इंफॉर्मेशन फ्लो नहीं है, उसकी बेहतरीन स्ट्रेटजी ये होगी टू कन्फेस। अब इस स्ट्रेटजी को टू कन्फेस, इसको कहा जाता है डोमिनेंट स्ट्रेटजी। अब ये प्लेयर बी की डोमिनेंट स्ट्रेटजी, प्रिजनर बी की, सॉरी नॉट प्लेयर बी, लेकिन प्रिजनर बी जो है उसकी डोमिनेंट स्ट्रेटजी होगी टू कन्फेस। सिमिलरली अब इसी तरह के एनालिसिस एक होगा या इसी तरह की रीजनिंग जो है प्रिजनर ए की तरफ से होगी। वो किस तरह इस चीज को रीजन करेगा? प्रिजनर बी इफ सॉरी ये प्रिजनर ए, if prisoner B confesses, then what should prisoner A do? अगर B confess करता है उसको 3 साल सजा मिलेगी। अगर A confess नहीं करता, he does not confess, तो उसको नुकसान ज्यादा है क्योंकि B की तो सजा कम हो जाएगी, 3 महीने हो जाएगी, प्रिजनर A की सजा कितनी बढ़ जाएगी, 5 साल हो जाएगी। तो उसके लिए अगर बी कन्फेस करता है उसके लिए बेहतरीन स्ट्रेटजी क्या है? बेहतरीन स्ट्रेटजी यही है कि वो भी इस चीज को कन्फेस कर ले। कन्फेस करने का मतलब मान ले इस चीज को। अगर सपोज बी, इफ बी नॉट कन्फेसेस, यानी वो नहीं मानता अपने जुर्म को, फिर ए को क्या करना चाहिए? अगर बी नहीं मानता अपने जुर्म को, नॉट कन्फेसेस, और ए कन्फेस कर रहा है, तो बी की कितनी सजा है? बी की सजा ये है 5 साल, जबकि ए की कितनी सजा रह जाती है? 3 महीने। सो इन दिस, इवन इन दिस केस इसमें ज्यादा फायदा है ए को, उससे पहले वाले से भी ज्यादा फायदा है। ए शुड स्टिल कन्फेस। A should still confess. जिस तरह बी की यही डोमिनेंट स्ट्रेटजी थी, कन्फेस कन्फेस, इसी तरह ए की भी यही डोमिनेंट स्ट्रेटजी होनी चाहिए, टू कन्फेस। ये उसकी डोमिनेंट स्ट्रेटजी है। ये होगी डोमिनेंट स्ट्रेटजीज दोनों प्लेयर्स की। इस गेम थ्योरी की एप्लीकेशंस बहुत ज़्यादा है। देयर इज लॉट ऑफ एप्लीकेशन ऑफ दिस थिंग, there are a lot of wide applications of this thing. We'll definitely be going through many of those, no, if not many of those, some of those. इसकी practical implementation बड़ी है। अभी हमने ट्रेड की बात की, ट्रेड में भी गेम थ्योरी इस्तेमाल होती है। कैसे होती है वो हम देखेंगे एग्जाम्पल। जस्ट बिफोर एंडिंग दिस लेक्चर, एक चीज़ जो इसमें रह गई है वो मैं आपसे डिस्कस करना चाहता हूँ। उसे कहा जाता है नैश इक्विलिब्रियम। किसी ने मूवी देखी है नैश ब्यूटीफुल माइंड, रसल क्रो की है। अगर इफ एनीबडी ऑफ यू हैज हैड द अपॉर्चुनिटी टू वॉच दैट, दिस इज अबाउट, इट वाज अबाउट दिस गाय Nash. This was a mathematician, John Nash. John Nash developed this Nash equilibrium of the game theory, and for that he was awarded a Nobel Prize. And I mean, it was definitely not that simple, but it was more complex than that. But he came up with this Nash equilibrium idea. Sorry for the line over here. There is this line, but this Nash equilibrium, what it is it is about, first of all, consider the prerequisite is that there is flow of information between A and B. I am just writing it as info, not as information as a whole. Just writing it as information between A and B. अब दोनों प्रिजनर्स के, दोनों कैदियों के दरमियान इंफॉर्मेशन की फ्लो हो रही है। जब इंफॉर्मेशन की फ्लो हो रही है, वो दोनों किस नतीजे पे पहुंचेंगे मुत्तफका तौर पे? उनके ख्याल में सबसे बेहतरीन स्ट्रेटजी जिसमें ना ए को नुकसान हो ना बी को नुकसान हो और उनकी सजा भी कम से कम हो जाए, वो कौन सी होगी? वो होगी जनाब ये वाली। ये वाला मैट्रिक्स जो है वो नैश इक्विलिब्रियम का मैट्रिक्स होगा, नॉट कन्फेस both for A and B. वजह यह है कि दोनों की सजा एक जितनी रह जाएगी और कम भी हो जाएगी। दिस इज कॉल्ड द नैश इक्विलिब्रियम। नैश इक्विलिब्रियम तभी बन सकता है जब देयर इज जब दोनों प्रिजनर्स जो हैं मिल बैठे और उनके दरमियान इंफॉर्मेशन का तबादला किसी तरीके से हो सकता है जिससे वो अपने पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू को बेहतर समझ सकते हैं एक दूसरे को। जाहिर है कोई भी नहीं चाहेगा, इनमें से कोई भी कैदी नहीं चाहेगा कि उसको 5 साल की सजा हो, 5 साल के लिए बंद कर दिया जाए। ना उसमें से ये कन्फेस भी एक नैश इक्विलिब्रियम हो सकता था, देखें इसमें, लेकिन उसमें सजा क्या हो सकती थी? सजा उसमें क्या हो सकती थी? 3-3 साल की दोनों को हो सकती थी। तो 1 साल जो है 3 साल से बेहतर है। सो दोनों ने कोऑर्डिनेट किया, दोनों के दरमियान इंफॉर्मेशन की फ्लो हुई, तो ये जो है 1-1 साल जो है दोनों ने एग्री किया कि मेरे लिए भी बेहतर है, तुम्हारे लिए भी बेहतर है, दोनों ए और बी के लिए। सो दे केम अप विद दिस अग्रीड स्ट्रेटजी। ये एक अग्रीड स्ट्रेटजी है आफ्टर द इंफॉर्मेशन स्टार्टेड फ्लोइंग, एंड दिस इज कॉल्ड द नैश इक्विलिब्रियम. This is pretty much it for today's lecture. We'll be definitely moving on towards now more practical things, more logical implementation of these trade policies, Nash equilibrium, and others, that sort of stuff. I'm sure you are looking forward to it, as am I. This is very interesting stuff. But anyway, in this study, a short summary of what we did in this lecture was that we went through the graphical analysis of quotas and tariffs, and what's the difference between them and how you can graphically illustrate it. Remember that it is not that simple. The real world is not that simple, but graphical analysis is a very powerful tool. I've seen many good leading economist and analyzer using just graphs and predicting very rightly what would happen. So you need to be good at this stuff. You need to know what is happening over here. And then we started with the game theory. We had discussed it before. It has a lot of practical implementation in real life. It is not that it's very complex, but I'm not going to go through the complexities of game theory. I'm just talking in terms of simple strategies, and its game theory is about strategies and what its implementation is to the real world for, and why is it important for a policy analyzer. We've discussed that definitely, but over here I went through the very basic, the very starting point. Whoever has to learn the game theory has to go through this prisoner dilemma thing. Once he goes through this prisoner dilemma, he should be able to learn other things too. This is the jumping point, the starting point, which everybody should be familiar with. So hopefully next time we'll be studying more goodies. Goodies means good things, and by that time relax, have some time out, go out, listen to music or something, whatever relaxes you, and I hope you have a nice time. Till then, goodbye and Allah Hafiz.